within the general security establishment between Department of Defense, CIA, and a few others over who's going to lead the charge in Afghanistan. This ends up going to the CIA under a man named Cofer Black, who developed what's called Project Greystone, which was a a small targeted force that cooperated with the Northern Alliance, absolutely ran train on Afghanistan, worked through that very quickly. What this led, though, to was a general feeling within the security establishment that they had to start changing the way they ran post 9/11 to more of a counterterrorism type of system. And what this led to was the NSA director at the time, who was named Michael Hayden, was asked directly by George Bush, what can you do to make the country safer? And he, with the cooperation of other NSA members, created what's known as the Terrorist Surveillance Program, or the TSE, or the TSP. And what this did is it basically authorized the NSA to get info without a warrant. And this was really the major expansion, is that they allowed them for the first time to try to get information on American citizens, or not American citizens, but calls made within America without a warrant. This is different than the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows so this is different than the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of '78, which would allow you to tap a phone call of a call between America and an international, and somewhere international. This allowed calls made within the continental United States, Alaska and Hawaii, able to be accessed by the NSA without a warrant. This subsequently also led to a change in the mission of the NSA from general intelligence gathering, like they did with the Cold War, state v. state type stuff, to counter-terror types, counter-terror stance, which made them incredibly more offensive and forced a massive change in how the NSA used to do things. Whereas they used to create investigations and target, they now basically created a global communication dragnet. They tied into all of the systems and began to collect what actually was 1.7 billion intercepts of information a day. These are things like what is said on, can be something as simple as what was said on the radio, like they could track calls made to NPR. This is internet history, this is text, calls, all this type of information was able to be intercepted by the NSA post 2001 up to 2003. This is obviously impossible to sort and cover, which was why a lot of information was missed. But not only that, in the mindset that a lot of these individuals had, and this comes from Richard Clark, who was part of the NSA at the time, said that the way that it was viewed was the information was not a needle in a haystack, but needles within a stack of other needles. So the information was all taken very seriously, which led to a whole bunch of inefficiencies and still to this problem, which is why they expanded, particularly in 2003, there was a massive expansion of the NSA into private corporations. And these are private corporations like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, CACI, KBR, Halliburton. All of these companies, these classic military industrial companies that have been making bombs and jets for the past 30, 40 years, are now supplying with people who basically are security intelligence analysts. They now have basically private armies of security analysts. They get paid a lot of money. If you did not have a problem being a part of a security apparatus, you could make a whole lot of money working for the NSA. Like, a whole lot of money. This is actually, if you go to a Washington Post article piece called Top Secret America by Dana Priest and William Harkin, they go through this expansion and actually create a fairly detailed map throughout the United States of these contractors, and there are thousands of them all throughout the country. And what's interesting is that they actually, we don't actually know how much money they cost. The actual yearly estimate of all of these, this NSA expansion is still kept secret, so we actually have no idea how much this money is actually costing us. Yeah?
What was the name of the article?
It was called Top Secret America. So all this happens till, what? Oh, another question?
So what exactly are the contractors allowed to do? Like what exactly?
They are, well, they work for the NSA, so they are given, basically the NSA tasks them with certain things. So some of them will be focused on specific types of information that is just filtered to them. But they have the same rights and they have the same guidelines as the NSA, just at large to do what they want. Yeah, they're just contracted out by the NSA. So this goes till about 2005 when we learned that the information that led us to the Iraq War was absolute crap, and the intelligence community is under quite a bit of fire, and you have this come to a head with the 9/11 Commission. And the 9/11 Commission creates a new position called the Director of National Intelligence, or the DNI, who is supposed to oversee all of intelligence. They are it's very funny, their trajectory. They, as written in the initial draft of the bill, were an incredibly powerful organizational tool that could organize all of the intelligence. However, during markup of the bill, they were just attacked relentlessly by the initial security apparatus, and they were watered down pretty heavily to where the Director of National Intelligence actually doesn't even have, he does now, or she does now, but at the original time, the person who was in charge, John Negroponte, didn't even have hiring or firing ability for it, which it was a useless organization in the beginning. But like all bureaucracies, they find ways to get access to more funds, and they're building a giant new site and expanding. They were subsequently tailed with the expansion of Department of Homeland Security as well as the NSA with the Obama inauguration. And there's a really interesting transition that happens within, or at least is perceived by, the Obama election. And what happened was he ran on aspects of transparency. I mean, that was a huge part of his campaign, was talking about opening up and shining a light on what was happening in securities, and was very much against torture and other these things, arguing for transparency. What happens is, during the inauguration of President Barack Obama, and in the subsequent 24 hours, he is finally shown, or he experiences some of the best and worst of the security apparatus. There is a Somali threat. There is a threat made against the president that a Somali bomber would attempt to ruin the inauguration. So in response to this, there is a highly securitized inauguration. You have biometric scanners, you have license plate readers, you have drones in the sky, you have access to thousands of closed-circuit television. You also, at the same time, have very beefed-up security for Obama. So he goes through this inauguration, and then he is read into all of these secret programs, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. And you subsequently see a very different Obama, a President Obama that is significantly different than campaign Obama, because President Obama has greatly expanded much of these programs. The DHS was greatly expanded under Obama. The FBI and their intelligence gathering abilities were greatly expanded under Obama. Same with the NSA. And what these groups did was basically create what is called a fusion center policy. And what they do is, these are fusion centers that are based all throughout the country. Actually, every single state has at least one, but the majority of them are actually in the Northeast or in populated centers like down by through Florida, there's a couple, and then California and Texas have a few extras. What these fusion centers are is they are gathering a whole bunch of incident reports. And what these incident reports are things that have been flagged by closed-circuit televisions throughout the country, things that have been flagged through other wiretaps, UAV postings, license plate scanners are now on. If you are a modern police force, which means that every major city, and primarily most cities, including Bellingham, those cars now have what are called license plate readers, and will drive by, read a license plate, throw up every information about the person that ought to be in that car, or potentially is in that car. So that type of information is all being collected actually at the state and local level. So what happens is the local police, state police, and then other federal agencies like the U.S. Marshals, etc., collect all of this information. They file specific incident reports like One of the problems was actually at the beginning was a lot of them were filing these very vague, very xenophobic reports like saw Muslim buying car, like, and they would send that off to the NSA, and it would be like, not helpful. So these things at the beginning were fairly terrible. However, they've greatly focused, but have still managed to expand. So that's kind of the general, since 9/11, the growth of where the industry is now. So now the backside of it, how and why they're able to do these things, we first can talk about the FISA Court. The FISA Court was developed or created by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of '78. They're a court that operates in secret that allows intelligence gathering services to get a secret warrant to, or in essence, tap without a warrant. But like I mentioned earlier, the original incarnation of that law only allowed you to do so if it was a call between a U.S. citizen, a U.S. phone number and an international phone number. This changed, like I mentioned, in after 2001 with the terrorist surveillance program. It allowed the NSA to do it without a warrant. But also, the FISA Act was heavily amended in 2006 with the Terrorist Security Act or something like that, or the Terrorist Surveillance Act, I think it was called, of 2006, amended it to allow them to actually just avoid the FISA court for a while. It allowed them a 6-month exemption before, so they were allowed to wiretap, then 6 months later they were allowed to ask the FISA government to exemption, and then 2007 was actually a year moratorium on that. So it allowed groups to collect large amounts of information from, warrantless wiretapping. Right now, the FISA court is obviously still in existence, and I think in their since '78, I don't know how many years that would be. 47? No, that's less than that. 37? I don't know, bad math. What?
35.
35? In their 35-year history, they have rejected 11 cases. So they are primarily a rubber stamp, or at the very least seen for a rubber stamp. And there are a few reasons for why this is probably the case. The first of which is that the way the judges for the FISA court are determined, it's just selected by the Chief Justice of the United States. So there is little to no accountability or knowledge of the decisions that the justices that these judges make. The other aspect is that there is only one side of the argument is heard. There is no special advocate for the Constitution or for public privacy protections. That's actually a bill that's been introduced in Congress, is to add a special advocate, someone who would argue in favor of protecting privacy rights, so someone who would argue why this could be potentially harmful, because in the what you hear right now, or what is argued in the FISA court, is just a government lawyer saying why we need this. There is little to no interrogation of the effect on privacy rights. Even so, I'm sure that you've heard that there have been quite a few violations of the NSA of FISA court orders. I think since 2010, there have been over 2,776 violations or something right along those lines. Some of those are things like just operator error. They have fat fingers, enter the wrong data. But there are quite a few red flag issues where they're like, you probably violated this purposefully. So there is genuine concerns over the violations. I actually think the House of Representatives yesterday had a vote to strip that aspect, strip the group that was doing that, the NSA of funding, but we'll see if that gets passed by the Senate and signed by Obama.
Congress in recess?
What?
They passed a bill with Congress in recess?
I thought that they voted against, maybe it was just a committee vote. It might have been just a committee vote.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is the best I can probably give you about just the general idea of the FISA Court. Do you have anything to add about that, Corey? Okay.
The techniques have grown.
What?
Techniques have grown rapidly in the last 12 years for
Yeah.
obvious reasons.
So, yeah, like we've said, modern security techniques have, and the modern security apparatus has absolutely expanded quite heavily in terms of size and variety of techniques. The arguments for why this security has become necessary are relatively compelling in that there are very real security threats, especially with expanded international engagement. The expansion of international drones, particularly throughout places like Yemen and Pakistan, have certainly made us an increased target for backlash. That being said, the effectiveness of this program is hotly debated. There are a few incidents that they were relatively embarrassed. The underwear bomber, for example, there had actually been an incident report filed about this man, but it was missed at the airport because his name was spelled incorrectly. So he actually should have been red flagged, but because the name was misspelled on the incident report than it was on the license that he was using to get on the plane, he was let go. He was allowed to go free. Similarly, the Times Square bomber, the one that tried to park a car and blow part of Times Square, that was stopped by a shopkeeper. That plot had been alluded to by multiple NSA and FBI intercepts, but there was very little connection between the two, and a few of them were actually just missed by people working at the Fusion Center. So there is a fair argument to be made that this system is not particularly effective. There are voices inside the security apparatus, both at the federal level and who have worked a long time at the state and local level, who say that they have transitioned too far away from good investigative work and are now just trying to perpetually justify themselves by the explanation of vague and enduring and unknowing threats. So, with that, I suppose I'll talk a little bit about how you will. Are there any questions before I talk about how this applies to debate? Yeah.
I maybe add one tiny thing to that, is that right now a lot of the national security apparatus is kind of under the auspices of the Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security in one way, shape, form, or another. But it's becoming increasingly more likely that some of these national agencies, for instance, there is something called the National Reconnaissance Office, which is essentially the ones that are responsible for building the satellites the spy satellites that listen in on conversations or do the electronic eavesdropping, that kind of stuff, that want to be able to make their own decisions rather than having their decisions be made by the Secretary of Defense. Right now that, ultimate decisions are made by the Secretary of Defense. They have efforts underway to take that decision-making authority out of the hands of the Secretary of Defense and just put it in their own hands, right, so that they can make the decisions themselves, which means there being fewer and fewer and fewer checks on any of these top secret organizations. They're starting to only be checked by themselves, right? They get their own decision-making authority for when to go ahead with something and when to do certain programs and new technologies and new platforms and so forth, which means there are just fewer and fewer and fewer checks being put in place to assure that there are not violations or abuses of power or.
Yeah.
So are there a lot of misconceptions on what the Prism discovery, I guess, by the public was supposed to be?
So that, we knew about that since 2005. We had known that they had been taking metadata since, that was the terrorist surveillance program. We've been taking metadata since 2005. What Prism is catching is just who you're calling, call data, day, where it came, all the call data, but it's not like a recording of your phone. And
So were people just freaking out just because it was a media sensation, or?
I think people were freaking out because it scared them, but it's probably the first time most of them have heard about it. But it had been fairly accessible to the public that this was going on since 2005. Any other questions before I move on? Yeah.
To piggyback on what she was talking about, the whole Prism thing and how the Amash Amendment was a big deal
Yeah.
putting like hacks and access to it and stuff like that. And I guess this is gonna lead into your debate, how this is the debate. It's like, is this only become a major issue because of Tea Party grassroots movements that have been like, oh my God, NSA bad, look at all this money we're buying, because like 75,000, Humvees are being, spent for American use and all these type of things.
There might be some aspect of that. You gotta understand, like, in terms of people's access to information, people tend to choose their own pathways. So for some individuals, I am sure that the Tea Party has played into the reason that they've paid more attention to this. I think that the other reason that people paid more attention to this is that I think that they're genuinely shocked at the scope of what's happened. I don't think that people realized just how expansive spying got since after 9/11, and I really think that people didn't realize just how much of it had turned internally. I think that began to shock people quite a lot as to how much information was being tracked internally, because there was a general belief within the United States, and certainly it was a naive one, but there was a general belief that it wasn't them. They didn't think it was them, and then they found out that their information had been taken. I think that's really what made a lot of people pay attention to it.
And frankly, I don't know that many people in this country are really that outraged.
Also fair.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, well, I guess I kind of biased because I was on the Hill all summer and people were calling constantly about, oh my God, the NSA spying, and it's just like this, and like people were just angry, like just yelling at me. I'm like, I'm just an intern, stop yelling at me. But it's kind of like, but that's basically how it was. It was terrible. Like people were just like seriously scared.
I'm sure they were pissed, but I also think that there's probably, that's a very vocal population.
Yeah.
The population that's like, fuck it, is not going to be super vocal about not giving a shit. Like, there are a lot of people out there who don't care that America's looking at their information. They could not care less. Yeah.
My question is what kind of information are they looking at? Like, I know they look at, like, general, like, who you're calling and how long the conversation was, but it's not like, or is it like they're like, listening to the conversation, or is it just
Well,
information
that would require a more in-depth investigation,
Right.
because they can't listen to everyone's conversations. That would just be impossible. So the way it tends to work is that everyone is in essence given a file, and trends are established for each person. Information that has specific keywords and tags is moved, and then if red flags are spotted, so for example, if your number continuously is calling a number in a place like Pakistan or Yemen, even if it's got good intentions, they're going to red flag you, and that means that information about you is going to be highlighted and is going to be run through to more people, and they're going to try and establish a trend. They're going to try and figure out what's going on there, and then if that becomes serious, they will start to listen to your calls. That is absolutely the next step, is they will go get a FISA warrant and listen to your calls.
I think that's a good point, that a lot of people don't understand exactly what those programs are doing. There aren't a bunch of NSA agents sitting in a room listening to all our phone calls. That would require billions of NSA agents. There aren't that many people in this country, right, or on the planet, right, to do that. So that's exactly right. They have different formulas for determining where the threat lies. And as soon as you or someone else starts having a bunch of phone calls to a person of interest to them, then you become a person of interest. And then once you become a person of interest, they start paying attention to your tree. But that means when you become a person of interest, they start looking into who are all of your phone calls going to and tracking all of that. And it only takes one or two steps before they're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of people's phone records, right? And so it's not until they make the calculation that you might literally be a threat that they start investigating a little bit more closely.
Yeah.
Another huge point is the Pompeo amendment passed about a few weeks ago, which was kind of like, it was like the Amash amendment, which the Amash amendment was basically going to take a battle axe to the center of the NSA's funding part. But the Pompeo amendment was more specific, and that actually did pass, which will not allow the government to basically monitor domestic phone calls as well as email traffic. It hasn't passed into law yet, it still has to go to the Senate, but the fact that the House passed it is a good chance that it probably will pass into the Senate into law, most likely, because it's extremely popular within the congressional community. So that's something to look at, the Pompeo, Vice Representative Pompeo.
I mean, in this country, we're in a little bit of a catch-22, because on the one side, we wanna say, I can't believe someone might violate my privacy. And on the other hand, we wanna say, government better damn well be paying attention to what's going on in order to keep me safe. Right? Do we want our cake and eat it too? And where do we draw the line between how much is too much? It's okay that they spy on other people, just not me. Right?
So
It's kind of like the not in my, you have the not in my backyard movement or attitude. This is maybe the not my cell phone movement or something like that, right?
was there not an extra leak like a while after Prism about something about emails? Like they were like reading, you actually could read your emails?
Oh, I think that's called key score, and yeah, they can, but they've been doing that for a while. I mean, they could have done that since 2001 if they wanted to. Yeah.
Well, don't phone companies, like, even before that, they keep records of things like who you're calling and how long the call is? I thought they were doing
Phone
that
companies?
even before.
Oh yeah. Oh no.
Like,
Phone
the
companies have been sharing
information
phone
there
companies have been
forever.
sharing information since 2001, or since early 2002. They have been sharing information if they wanted to. Absolutely.
And it was probably being collected before that.
Yeah. And internet providers as well. Yeah.
Right, I mean, I've heard people saying that it's ridiculous that we don't think that the NSA hasn't been storing every single bit of that data for the last 30 or 40 years. And they probably have, and from one perspective, you might want to say, again, damn straight, they're the National Security Agency, they better be doing that because that's their job.
But wasn't the
It
National
all
Security,
depends on what your priorities are.
I didn't think the National Security Agency's been around for that long. I didn't think.
National Security Apparatus.
Okay,
Right. The agencies change their name all the time, from one decade to the next. But just because you change the name of something doesn't mean it hasn't been going on since, telephones were invented. Okay, maybe just the last 50 years.
Anything else? Okay, so how might this come up in debates? So there are a few reforms to the FISA Court that have been offered. The first of which is like I mentioned earlier, a piece of legislation that would create a special advocate at the FISA Court that would argue in favor of constitutional what the constitutional limits are to this specific search. There's another piece of legislation that would take the selection authority from the Chief Justice and give it to, I believe, the Judiciary Committee of the Senate, and they would be the ones who would decide, based upon nominations by the President, they would be the ones who would decide FISA Court judges from there on. And the belief is, for both of those, is that ought to create a FISA Court that has a little bit more stringent standards for some of the warrants, so you don't have 11 rejections in 35 years of operation. Do you have a question?
It went from going from the Chief Justice
To, I believe, the Judiciary Committee of the Senate. I'm not positive it's the Senate or just the Judiciary Committee, but I believe it's just the Judiciary Committee. And both of those are meant to make the, like I said, the NSA a little bit more stringent in terms of the way that it applies its decisions. There are obviously other amendments to the NSA and to the security apparatus at all. There are obviously the defunding amendments. There are, like you mentioned, the PAPOW?
The PAPOW.
PAPOW.
Yeah, I'll get it, I'll get
The PAPOW amendment that
PAPOW.
Sorry, the PAPOW amendment that would, limit the amount, limit the scope of the NSA. That being said, it's if you are on the opposition of any resolution that limits one agency, you have a pretty awesome solvency block that says that does not stop this whole security apparatus. There are quite a few organizations that would be very easily able to continue what the NSA is doing. And those fusion centers actually already are joint operations between groups like the DHS and the FBI, and as well as the CIA, and ultimately the Director of National Intelligence. They would all have access. They would still be able to operate. I suppose that there are I'm trying to think about how this would apply. Yeah.
I have the text, it's very short. It says, none of the funds made available by this act will be used in the National Security Agency to conduct an acquisition pursuant to Section 701 to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978 for the purpose of targeting U.S. persons, acquire, monitor, or store the content of such defined sections of any electronic communication to the United States person from provider of electronic communication services to the public pursuant of the Foreign Intelligence Services of 1978. So basically, they can't record or store anything from like companies, like the cell phone companies can't just like give it away. Like if you want to take a look at it.
I thought that was so the NSA can't store anything that comes. Let me see this. So.
That was my response to people mad at Congresswoman Davis. She voted for that, which is basically the same thing. That is what the
United States. By this act. Interesting. Alright. Well,
So that was passed on July 24th, but it still got to go through conference through the Senate as well, because it was a
right.
big, extensive, it was part of the Security Act bill that
Right.
we were fighting about, so. Yeah.
So, when you are the affirmative and you're forced to defend one of these reforms, you obviously want to have some sort of affirmative that, or some sort of advantage that deals with privacy rights at large in terms of what is the effect of privacy rights. And there are some pretty good arguments in favor of why privacy is a human right and why it's absolutely essential to the development of the self. So when you are forced to defend these types of things, or forced to defend these types of actions, you certainly can go a more critical route in terms of defending self-actualization as critical and why privacy rights are important. The second thing that you ought to do is you ought to defend a toned down and slimmed down security apparatus. The very easy, non-unique link turn to disads about you are making the country less safe is the security apparatus is failing in the status quo. If you are an affirmative, that should probably be a block at the top of the case, talking about how the current security apparatus misses events. It is ineffective, and the only way to change it is through some sort of type of reform that disincentivizes the dragnet mentality. The types of, we're going to collect every piece of information and then work it from there, rather than following leads and working it more like criminal cases like they would back in the 80s and 90s. So you obviously want to focus on those two things. So you have a really good advantage on the affirmative that allows you to access some of the opposition ground or take some of the opposition ground away, as well as you also have access to some critical impacts or some impacts that you might be able to say matter on a more integral level, because you cannot determine the value, or you cannot determine the value of a death until you've determined someone's been able to determine the value of their life, something along those lines. So that's definitely the ways that you can go. On the opposition, based upon the resolution, you are offered a few opportunities. The first of which is you are allowed to potentially make changes that change the process of the system. So you are allowed, based upon like a resolution that says enacting FISA Court reforms may cut you out of some ground, but a resolution that says the United States federal government should enact one or more reforms to the NSA to increase privacy protections, you are allowed to make changes to the process that may not affect privacy changes, but still change the process and make a more effective NSA or DHS or national security apparatus. So there's quite a lot of counterplans that allow you to steal the affirmative ground. The other thing is you obviously can just defend the current system. There is an argument to be made that you have to have people in the shadows doing this type of work, or else there will be another attack. That even if the system is ineffective now, it will only inevitably get better, more fine-tuned, and becomes a necessity in this type of world, especially in a world where a lot of it hinges upon competent cyber capabilities. So we might as well fund this type of security apparatus because its cybersecurity capabilities are absolutely integral in a 21st century state. Yeah.
So you can use this quote saying that you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than dying in a terrorist attack as far as the U.S. is concerned?
Well, that would be an answer to that. I'm saying that the way that you would phrase this is that you would say, look, the only way that we can absolutely defend ourselves is through this policy. Here is why it's necessary. And you would talk about the cybersecurity aspects of the information. You would talk about how this type of widespread intelligence gathering is the only way that you can kind of piece together larger trends that allow you to uncover conspiracies and connections between groups. Because if you're going to make connections between cells that are operating plans in Pakistan or Saudi Arabia to people who are actually executing these types of attacks in Latin American nations or in our own nation, you obviously have to have access to a wide amount of intelligence in order to make these types of connections. So this type of system is absolutely essential to uncovering these international plots. That leaves you with a relatively low risk calculus because these things might not be likely, but it is certainly an argument that you can defend. Yeah? I thought you were
Sorry about that.
Obviously on the opposition, you have access to some critical, just like on the affirmative, you have access to some biopolitical arguments. On the opposition, you certainly have access to arguments that talk about misidentifying the ways in which privacy rights are being violated. So you have access to some of those similar things, talking about managerialism. Certainly, any affirmative that enacts reforms would establish what is good and what is acceptable and what is unacceptable forms of state control, and you have access to reasons as to why that type of delineation is bad. I'm just trying to think of what else there is to talk about this. It's a strange. Privacy debates are a very strange debate because they lead into areas that are particularly more nebulous in terms of the impacts, but also the likelihood of shit happening. Like, if you are going to defend the current security apparatus, you have an impact that's kind of shifty. It's a vague, potentially tomorrow terrorist attack, which could be good, but also could just be argued like, no, that shit won't happen for a while. Here's all the reasons why, and you could have no impact. Similarly, if you're on the affirmative and you're forced to defend something like this, you're defending something nebulous like privacy, which is a very difficult concept to not only articulate, but defend why it's important, but defend why it's not being already violated. Or why individuals are not already, like, a great answer to privacy is important is, if that was true, Facebook wouldn't be so popular. To a lot of people, and myself included, it seems like a lot of people don't actually care about their privacy.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So it seems to me like a lot of people freak out about, like, the government knowing their stuff. Like you were saying, like, they freak out about the privacy from the government, but then, like, don't give a shit if they tell everyone, like, the address of their house on check-in on Facebook, So, like, but do you think there could be arguments made to why, like, the government uniquely should not know, but, like...
If you think the government doesn't know that you post those things on Facebook, then
seems pretty easy. That's pretty silly, yeah.
They know where you live. Fuck, they filled out a census. Like, that's the they know where you live. Like, that's postal codes. Like, if you're worried about governments having that information, they already have that information. I mean, they've got that information. Like,
Also the fact that you can like change your address with US Postal Service.
yeah, like they know
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
live. Like,
For sure.
most of the times they don't care. They like, if you're worried, if you ride a bus in most cities nowadays, you're being filmed and that information is being collected and given to the government. Like, we subject ourselves daily to privacy violations because we'd rather be convenient. If you wanted to, I suppose you could plan locks throughout most cities that would dodge CCTVs, but it would be horribly inconvenient for you. Like, it would be. Some would just say that this type of system is the price we pay for a stable and secure society. There's an argument to be made there. Yeah?
Is there an argument to be made about the integrity of the system itself, such as like the Snowden, the Mannings, all that stuff as well, saying that, that the system itself isn't even working because look how leaky it is. Like,
You can make those arguments on the affirmative. Absolutely, that the system. Well, I don't know how those arguments would function because, frankly, even after the you gotta, if you're comparing the effect of something like the Pentagon Papers and the Snowden leaks, which both indicate highly illegal acts by the U.S. federal government, people were just livid about the Pentagon Papers. People are a little bit less livid about the Snowden leaks.
right.
And that's for a whole bunch of reasons. The number one, I think, is that there's pictures of cats on the internet, and that's, I'd much rather read that than read the links to the Snowden links. I'd much rather look at cat pictures. What?
Sorry, I just feel it's almost Candy Crush.
Oh, all right.
That's the one that was giving me trouble.
You finally did it too.
Sorry.
But yeah, no. People, like, it's true. How many of you have any of you actually read the Snowden leaks? Any of them? No. How many of you within the past week have at least been like, oh, cool, cat pictures?
I think everyone.
Making Gaffney's laptop.
No one. That's what I'm trying to say. No one gives a shit about this because they don't think it affects them, and if it does affect them, they're certainly not seeing the effects.
And then the crazies in the backyard on the roofs.
There are some people that are really, really mad,
Yeah.
and there are some people that don't know, and there are some people that know and couldn't care less.
There was
Yeah.
a call.
Well, doesn't it connect to the whole thing, like, technically Facebook is a public domain, like, the place, you put something on Facebook and it's public information.
No, because Facebook owns it.
Well,
Yeah, Facebook owns
Well,
it.
yeah, but I mean, it's out there for the public to see, so isn't it because, like, I don't know, Gmail, for example, is owned by Google.
Yeah.
So they have access to that, so I don't understand why people are so upset about it.
Because they
really
didn't,
don't get it.
I think the number one reason was that they really didn't think it was them that was being spied on. They always have like this, post 9/11, like there was a very clear manifestation of a terrorist. Like we created that image in our mind, and we subsequently just consubstantiated that individual with who the security app was looked after. Like that was the individual. We had just one person in our collective heads. That was naivety on our part, and no one really questioned that. And I think that was genuinely scary to some people. I think the second reason that this has kind of been that people are worried is that it's been a little while since 9/11. It's been over 10 years, and people are starting to wonder if they're finally asking the question: have we gone too far in this system? Like everyday people are finally starting to question the logic behind the Patriot Act, because let's be honest, for the longest time, that just wasn't questioned. No one questioned it. I mean, you didn't even have people talking about sunsetting provisions until 2007. Like, they were still adding on to it until 2007. So, without anyone really batting an eye. So, I think that people are finally starting to care about that a little bit more. Yeah.
So I actually kind of it was interesting hearing the high schoolers talk about this at the high school big camp I was at, because
Yeah.
they, like, their original argument to it, like, when I would talk about the NSA, they would just be like, oh, well, you know, I got nothing to hide, so I don't mind. And so I was like, it sounds exactly like the whole, like, oh, well, the government should be able to come in and search your house if you got nothing to hide. But at the same time, like, none of the, like, you know, unreasonable search and seizure wouldn't apply to any of this because you don't own all the information they're taking, right? Like the phone company and Google.
Oh
Facebook
yeah,
owns
everything
it.
you put on Facebook, the government already has.
Yeah.
Government created you with Facebook already. Like they already, boom, they got that. Government has
Like
your
even your
iTunes.
phone.
I mean, they have your iTunes purchases.
Even like your phone,
They
like
do. Like,
information, like
that's
the phone
important. They need
company
that.
owns, right?
what?
Even like your phone information, like the phone company owns.
Oh,
or, like,
yeah, they got
Google
that.
owns. Like, does Gmail like own the content of your emails as well?
Maybe. I don't know. Have you read the Gmail
No.
search agreements? Well, that's probably a place to start. That's probably a place. There's a documentary out there called I think it's Click If You Agree, or maybe it's just called Terms and Conditions. But it's a movie that talks about what those terms and conditions are and what you're actually agreeing to, and it's relatively shocking stuff. Like you are giving away quite a bit when you sign on to those things.
Didn't know it's text or
What?
they can't read text yet.
No, they can't read your text unless they have a warrant.
Yeah, but then you just delete it.
The phone company says it.
No, I'm just saying, like, even the phone companies can't get it. Not even, like, that's like one
No,
thing that's
dude,
really
if the
effective.
government asks the phone companies for
I
a
mean,
text message,
But
they will
the
get
phones
AT&T
don't have the.
they will get the text
AT&T is
message.
admitted to
Yeah.
giving this information
Yeah.
away.
The text?
Yes.
Because not all, maybe
Yeah, once
AT&T
it's
does, but
sent,
not
it's
all
not-
cell phone companies have the infrastructure to take text transmission.
Maybe. I am inclined to believe that the government has your text messages if they wanted your text messages. Like,
There's also a difference between what they're not supposed to have and what they.
Yeah, I've always heard that maybe AT&T because it's a huge company, but like some like Cricket and a few other.
oh, maybe, yeah,
They don't
maybe
have the
those don't.
infrastructure to hold all those text message data.
Maybe that, but certainly the big companies like AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, all of them have given shit away to the government. They
The
did that
last
a while
60
ago.
years have taught us the government knows far more about our everyday lives than they do about ours.
For example, some of the violations that the NSA was cited for was searching the wrong database. They will collect, like, for the NSA, it is perfectly legal or perfectly acceptable for them to collect all the illegal shit they want as long as they don't read it. So they'll collect it and have a database of like, don't touch. And a lot of and quite a few of the violations by the NSA over this past year have been searching the wrong database. So they take a bunch of stuff that they're not supposed to have, and then they search through it, and they're like, oh no, I clicked the wrong database. I searched for keyword instead of author or something like a library search, but like that they get that violation, they get that slap on the wrist, but the privacy violation has already happened, right? Nothing really happens. They chalk it up as something like fat fingers or improperly searched the wrong database. Nothing happens. Like, it's a violation. It gets ticked off.
So I've heard some like legislation or some like argument for legislation that like, oh, you should only be able to tap people or search people who are persons of interest. Wouldn't it not be fairly easy for them to just label whoever they wanted to label as a person of interest if they wanted to search them?
A good example of this would be every male and female between the ages of 13 to 55 that is killed in a drone strike is automatically titled an enemy combatant.
I thought it was just males. But
Nope.
wow.
We're gender neutral in America. Or at least our drones are. Our drones are unisex. One kill fits all. Yeah, they just title them enemy combatants. So yeah, we can just title them persons of interest. And as it stands, you can just get a FISA Court warrant. If you really wanted to, like, it wouldn't be hard. I'm sure that they could piece together something. I don't know, did you buy a Richard Wright book or you know, Booker? If you bought a Booker T. Washington book, you'd be like, that's. I don't trust you. Better get a warrant. Any other questions? Cool. Have a good afternoon.